Okay. Again, let me introduce myself to anybody who doesn't know who I am. I am Lady Rainai Ironfist out of the Golden Plains. I have a very much so huge passion for fiber arts. Um, Everybody can hear me okay?
It's a polite way to get attention. Is there something you need, love?
Okay. Um,
I won't have you
so,
right now.
sorry, is someone talking?
Yeah.
I think.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry.
Okay. Um, it happens. So we've covered a lot of the basics of general knitting as far as casting on and doing knit and purl stitches. This is going to be a class to kind of build on top of that, introducing more than one color in the project. Um, so without further ado, we're going to get started. There's several different ways that you can integrate color into your pieces. One of the easiest ways that does not require you to have to change the colors of your change the yarn sources is going to be purchasing multicolored yarn. You can get the self-striping one like this one. You can get gradient yarns if you want a nice smooth change, or you can just get a variegated yarn to just kind of give you a nice little mottled look. The self striping and the gradient yarns are very much so great for use in other types of colorwork projects, whether that be striping or entrelac or even stranded or intarsia, because you get that color changing happening throughout the pattern as it goes up the project. Um, so one of the other things is the next easiest step up as far as color work goes is going to be stripes. This is just utilizing more than one source of yarn. So if it's for in this case, this one's utilizing four different colors, like the orange yarn, a white yarn, a navy yarn, and a gray yarn. You do want to make sure that you are changing your yarn source at the end of a wrong side row. That way, it'll give you a nice smooth finish. This works really good for garter stitch if you are working a flat piece. Otherwise, we do recommend, or not recommend, unless you're wanting the look of it, of course, for a flat piece to be done in the round, which I'll actually show you on a piece that I have prepared whenever we get to the practical section. And of course, we have my new companion here who's going to be helping me out in classes in the future, who is Alfie the alpaca. Um, and he is going to be recommending lots of good best hints and practices. So if you see him on a slide, he has good tips and tricks that I have learned over the decade plus that I have been knitting. And the big one is always going to be weave in your ends as you go if you are doing anything where color changes happen. Because you've already spent hours and hours on a project, and the last thing that you want to do is then stare at 100 ends that you have to weave in after the fact. I have so many projects that wound up in the unfinished forever bin because I just haven't brought myself to want to weave in ends. Another method is going to be duplicate stitch. This one is fairly easy because you are just knitting your blank piece with a solid uh, color, and you do go back in with needle and another color of yarn, and you're basically tracing over your stitches to give you the pattern. So you go from this to this. Now, it does make it a little bit stiffer. It does make it a little bit bulkier, just because you do have that extra layer of uh, material in those stitches. Um, but it's really fun and really relaxing, kind of a cross between embroidery and cross stitch. And if I'm ever moving too fast, please let me know and I'll slow down or I'll go over other stuff in more detail. Um, this one is another easy one. It is called slip stitch knitting. Uh, for a slip stitch, instead of knitting a stitch whenever you get to it, you just move it from your unworked needle to your finished worked needle for that row, whether you're left-handed or right-handed. So if you're right-handed, you'll just slip it off of the left needle onto the right needle and continue moving that piece so it'll have gone unworked. And it will create a very cool pattern as it goes up. You can see here it creates a fun little honeycomb pattern with this specific one where they knit a whole line across, and then whenever they got to the next color, they actually slipped the gray over like one or two rows, and then they knit another line of just that gray to create the honeycomb effect, which you can kind of see back here how there wasn't, you can see like right in here, that gray is missing because it was not actually worked, and it was worked to the front of the piece. And that's basically just spicy stripes is what my sister called it whenever I found it. Then we have Intarsia, or picture knitting. And this is a way to add larger motifs of color work to your project. You do need to have multiple sources of yarn. So in the case of this pillow, she would need 2 balls or 2 sources of white yarn and 1 source of red, because as you work across your project and you get to the red part, you'll actually be dropping 1 source of white and picking up red, and then dropping the red when you get to the end of it, and then picking up the white again to finish out the row, and you just repeat that as you go. And that's a really good way to utilize bobbins. If you do not have yarn bobbins, you can just get paper clothespins and wrap the clothespin around wrap the yarn around the clothespin and to secure it in place as you are working, just to kind of keep it nice and neat. This is going to be a situation where you do want to have gauge swatches, because that will tell you how much yarn you need on each bobbin, so you're not having to change out your yarn colors halfway through because you missed your mark of how much you needed to have on your bobbin in the middle of your project. So instead of you needed 10 yards, but you only cut 7, so you were short and you have to do a join in order to fix that. And we'll go over joins whenever I get into the practical part. Let's see. This one is Entrelac, and it looks a lot more complicated than it actually is. It looks wonderful in stripes, or as I mentioned, I mean, not stripes, in well, I guess this is technically stripes with different colors on each row section, or you can just use the self-striping or the gradient yarn, and you'll actually see the gradients changing as it goes, because it's worked this way, and then your squares are worked this way. So it's constantly offsetting itself as it works up. You do need to practice picking up stitches and making sure that you can close the little gaps that are right in these corners. Otherwise, you'll have holes. This is one of my earlier Entrelac pieces. You can kind of see my stitches here where I was working them are not as clean as they could have been. They are a little bit loose. But that's just something you get with practice with any skill. I have found that using stitch markers, especially in the beginning, is really helpful to make sure that you're staying within the correct section, so you don't accidentally take a stitch from one of the other squares as you're working or you're picking up stuff. And it does create that really nice basket weave. And then this is the one that I'm actually going to be focusing on today in the practical, is the stranded knitting. It's very good for quick, small repeats. So unlike with Intarsia, where you have the big block of color in the middle, this is going to have the different repeating. You can see all the little crosses here where your stitches are not crossing maybe more than 4 or 5 stitches at a time. You do want to make sure your float tension is correct. And whenever I say float tension, that is the yarn that is being carried behind the work. And I'll show you that whenever I get to the practical side of this. So we have, and one of the things that is highly recommended whenever you work stranded is that you work it in the round or with the double knitting technique if you are working it flat, because it is easier to do that way because you only have to worry about doing knits across the way, or in the case of double knitting, you're knitting every other stitch and purling every other stitch instead of having to worry about where your floats are in the middle of the project. Um, and I'll go over that a little bit more detail whenever we get to that section. This is the double-stranded knitting or double-sided stranded knitting. Technically, yes, this should have been Intarsia for this guy right here, but I was just securing my floats every 3 stitches or so, 3 or 4 stitches, and that was just twisting my yarn one over the top of the other to secure it in place, so I didn't have really long floats going behind this to make it pucker. One of the reasons I really enjoy doing the double-sided stranded is because it does create this wonderful mirror image, or inverse image, I should say, and it can still be provide very, very pretty, intricate patterns as you go up. So one of the things, no matter what you're doing as far as your color work goes, you're going to want to know how to read a chart. So this is usually done, you'll usually start from right to left. I know I numbered these backwards. That was the Excel program being weird. And you'll usually go this way, and then you'll come back and you'll go left to right, and then back right to left. Because the way you're looking at this is the way you're going to be facing it, and usually you're going to start here with your cast on rows and everything else. It really doesn't matter, I guess, in the end, so long as you make sure that you follow your pattern. Your one color will be designated the darker color, and then one color will be designated the lighter color. And if there are multiple colors, there will usually be included in as another shade. I went with black and this gray and white just because it was really easy to see. Or if there's a lot of colors, you'll see symbols in the squares to very similar to a cross stitch or embroidery piece pattern to show you what color needs to go where. And it does help to draw arrows in the beginning whenever you're not used to reading a chart to tell you which direction that you're needing to go. Okay, I think that's all on that one. So I'm going to switch over to the practical one. If I could get oh no, I need to start that video. Are you going to record? Could I get a spotlight thing then on Rainai practical? Please. Okay.
Yes, one moment.
Thank you. There we go. Okay. Okay, got it. Okay, so everybody can see my table. Sorry, it is kind of messy. This is a multi-purpose craft table that does everything from resin to being a gaming computer station. So, okay, there we go. So this is the practice piece that I prepared to show you guys. This bottom piece is actually done in the double-sided stranded. So you can see the pattern is on either side here. and it makes this really nice, very stretchy fabric. It's not spotlighted. Okay, give me a second.
I apologize, Rainai. I don't appear to have that ability. I'm working on it.
One moment. Because I pinned it. Does that fix it?
We can have everyone pin it. It is pinned on the recording, but in order for it to
Okay.
be spotlighted for everyone, everyone either has to pin it or I have to figure out how to spotlight it.
Okay. Okay.
I apologize, guys, for the technical difficulties. If you could please pin Runai's practical video so that you can see her hands as she works. Please let me know if in chat if you have any difficulty with that.
Okay. Is everybody able to pin it?
Oh, lady. Hey.
Belle, if you could mute yourself, please. Thank you. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody was able to pin this. So, just to go back over it, this is the double-sided stranded. I did it this way because it was the easiest one to cast on at this point. And you can see that the pattern is on either side and you don't have the floats exposed and you don't have the reverse side of your stitches seen. And it does make a really pretty double thick fabric that is really nice for hats, pot holders, or scarves. One of the things that you do want to make sure of whenever you are picking out colors to work with, the best thing you can do is look at the colors that you're wanting to use and take a black and white photo of them. Because while the colors may be different, they may not be a different value, and that can cause you to have a really hard to distinguish piece. I'm going to show you guys an example of that. That was, the colors were requested, so that is why I went with them. You can see here, there we go, light, if I can remember that. This is a really nice, very pretty teal color. This one is a dark gray color. You can tell that they are two very different colors, but whenever they are here in a normal light, these two are very similar in value, so they are very hard to distinguish unless you are looking for the pattern piece. A good example of that is down in here. You can't see the actual pattern very well because the color values are too similar. At least I'm hoping that it is the value is correct for the darkness of them. So yeah, you always want to pay attention to this. That is why I went with these two colors that are contrast of one another. So whenever you are doing your stripes, why it is a good idea to do them on the end of a row is so that you don't end up with one of these little lines, unless that is what you are wanting to go for as far as a technique or design element, to have this here. And it'll create this nice, lovely float here, unless you're doing garter stitch and then it's no holds barred. You do whatever you feel like doing. This one is the stranded, so closer to Fair Isle, with the stitches being carried across the back. You can see where it can get a little too loose, but that happens sometimes. Just whenever you see it, you can tug it gently. You want your floats on the back to not be super tight. You want them to kind of have a little bit of give to them because you want your fabric to be able to stretch and move. You know you've done your tension correctly on these whenever they kind of do a little swag or a very, very subtle smile shape um, behind your piece. Um, this is an example of them being done way too tight. Like right in here, you can see that it's much more bunched together from the top, because you can see how much smaller that is. Sorry, trying to make sure my camera's right. Um, and there's not a lot of give to this side because I held my yarn too tight. So while it has give here, if I were to stretch it out to where it needed to be, there is no give whatsoever to these floats. So you want to make sure whenever you're carrying your yarn, you have that there. So I'm going to go over joins with this piece. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll make sure to hit as many of them as I can. Okay, so I just got us a little base piece started here, and I know that looks like the image is, no, it's not flipped. It's flipped on my end. Joining the yarn. So this one is going to be a join where you don't have to cut your thread. This is something that if you are more familiar with doing, where's my yarn caught? My yarn is caught. Let's do that. To create a nice little smooth finish. There's a few ways you can do this if you're new to knitting. You can just drop your other color and then stick your needle in as if you were to knit. And then you are just going to loop your other thread and then continue knitting from there. Yes, it is going to be loose those first few stitches, but whenever you get to the point that you need to be, or a few stitches in, you can actually tighten up everything by pulling your yarn a little bit to tighten up those stitches, and it won't be noticeable at all. So another way to join yarn. Did anybody need me to show how to do that join again? Okay. Another way that you can join without having to cut your yarn is you will make a slip knot. If you don't know how to make a slip knot, the easiest way that I have found to do it is to hold the yarn in your hand as so. You'll have your short tail over here. You do want to have a longer tail to be able to weave in your ends. I like to flip and then pull my slip knot through, and then you'll actually put it on the needle next to your working yarn, and you're actually going to knit into both of those stitches as if they were one stitch with your new color. One of the downsides to this is that it does create a little bit bulkier of an edge right here, because you have that extra bit of yarn right in there. So it can make it a little bit bulky. All right. Sorry, I'm going back to the beginning so we're not changing 1,000 colors at once. Okay. So another one is one that actually involves you cutting your yarn. This one is probably the easiest one for beginners to do, but it does mean you're weaving in a lot of ends, and it also means that it's going to make it harder to carry your yarn up the side of the piece, which is how I achieved this one. Because you can see there's not an end to be woven in over here. The only time you get to see an end that needs to be woven in is up here at the top, because I carried my color changes up yarn as I worked. Okay, so for this one, we're going to cut our yarn. You want to make sure you leave at least 6 inches. 6 inches of yarn for you to work with. And then we're going to go back to our different color yarn. We're going to make that slip knot. Oh, I need to make a longer tail. Like so. And then you're going to get your old yarn, your other color yarn that you're working with. You're going to pull that tail through. There we go. And then you're going to tighten that up and make sure it's as close to the needle as you can get it. Okay. And then you're just going to continue with your new color. And this is, you just repeat this process if you're just wanting to do stripes with your color changing of yarn. And it's just the same here. Okay. And we're going to go back across with the purl to make sure it's that pretty stockinette to show off our stitches. Because with a garter stitch, it does tend to lose any detail, like in the stranding that I'm about to show you guys how to do. Okay. Because you don't ever really want to start your stranded on a wrong side row. Okay. So we're going to start doing a stranded pattern. I'm basically just going to do those plus signs from earlier. No, you can use straights. I prefer using the circular needles myself because they do bend, especially for the class. You can see I'm right here on top of the table and I have my short ends. Whereas with the straights, it would be preventing me from maneuvering here. It also makes it easier to travel. With working with this type of stuff, with these patterns, it is recommended to do stranded in the round because you don't want all of your floats exposed. And whenever you do it in the round, it'll actually keep them enclosed in like this here. So you're not having to see all of this stuff. It'll keep it nice and neat and makes it already a finished product. And whenever you have circulars, you can work in the round here with either magic loop, or if it's a hat, you have your hat sized needles already. But it's really up to you as far as your preference. If I still have time at the end of this, I will show you guys how to do the double stranded. It is not as hard as it looks at all. I might do that as another class if I don't have time, because that is my favorite way to do this stranded, because it's all nice and neat and it's really cool looking. So I'm going to do a quick join with my, oh no, I'm not, I'm gonna, yes, I am. I'm going to do a quick join with my orange here. And like I said, your first stitch there is going to look a little bit wonky just because of that type of join that I just did not include a slip knot. Okay. You don't want your floats to go really far behind the piece. You want to make sure you try to keep your yarns oriented about the same way, but you do want them to cross over the backs of one another. No, that's my tail. So for here, I'm going to cross over so I can start working with my blue some more. We're going to do about We're going to do about 3 stitches in blue. I'm just kind of winging it at this point for this pattern. And then we're going to pick our orange back up. Where'd she go? Okay, so there's our orange. And I'm going to actually bring her underneath the blue for now, because I don't want my yarn sources to get tangled. Because it's always the worst whenever you're knitting along and you just have this waiting on you to try to fix itself. And then we're going to drop the blue. We're going to pick up that orange. And then we're just going to knit. And you don't want it to be a super loose tension. I mean, a super tight tension. Because if you do a super tight tension, you can see that it's just bunching all of those stitches up on this hook. So you want it to be snug, but you do not want it to be tight, because you don't want to create a bunching, but you don't want it to be too loose to have created a hole. You want it to have that really nice sag right there. Okay, so we've got our 3 stitches in orange. We're going to go back to the blue, drop that, and then pick this back up, and we're just going to finish out the row in the blue. One of the other reasons that it's normally not recommended to work stranded flat is for some people it is more difficult to work that way whenever you're looking at your pattern. Whenever you're doing a color work pattern and it's in the round, you can just go straight across instead of having to do that zigzag. If you're working it in the round or with the, you can just do that one pattern and just follow it around like a loop going up. So we're going to purl across until we get to where we want our next color change to happen. And I'm going to purl. We're going to actually purl this stitch, and then I'm going to pick up this one. But since this one hasn't been used a whole lot, I'm actually going to try to secure this blue here by actually tucking it around. So it's actually the blue is on top of the orange. And then working it back here with making sure all of my floats are in the back. Because if you don't, let me do this. I'm going to show you guys what it looks like. If you accidentally leave your non-working yarn in the back, and then now we've got to remember to purl that. We're going to drop that back there because we're showing you guys how to not do it, so you can see what it looks like. And then bring it back here. So it's really just a series of following the pattern and just remembering which colors you need to hold. If you can knit both continental and English, you can hold your yarn in either end. I do not have the ability to knit continental as well as I would like, so I just do the drop method. So if you accidentally have your yarns in the front, what you can do that is an easy fix, you should really tink back or work backwards on it. But if you feel like doing it the lazy way, you can. Whenever you get to the end of the row, I usually like to twist my yarn. So whichever yarn I'm going to be working with, I will flip it so that it gets caught and trapped and gets carried up the side of the work. We're going to knit. And then you can see this is where we have that first float. I'll actually go in underneath the float, catch the yarn off that needle, and then just kind of work it that way to get the float on the correct side. That is the quick and dirty way of doing it. It's not the professional way of doing it. That's the cheaty mode of doing it to get your float on the right side. and then you'll just move the stitches that you hadn't worked back over because we're not slip stitching. Okay, and then you just keep knitting until you want to do a color change, and then you just change your color, drop, and knit. That pretty much covers how to do stranded knitting. We have about 5 minutes left. So I want to make sure that I open the floor to any questions. Does anybody have any questions at all, or have something that they want to see me go over in more detail?
Do you have any recommendations for finding good patterns to start with to try things out?
If you have access to Ravelry, I highly recommend Ravelry. You can do that. I can, if you reach out to me, I will actually give you guys a way to find me via Facebook or Gmail. And I can help you find patterns. There's so many different resources. If you just type in beginning stranded knitting patterns on Google, they will pop up, and it's wonderful. That's actually how I learned how to do it, was via Ravelry and just a Google search on how to do stranded knitting in the beginning. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay. Is there any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay. If you guys don't mind, first off, thank you guys so much for attending my class. Hopefully you guys learned a lot. I know there was a lot to cover in a short amount of time, especially with color work and there being so many different types of ways to do color work. Since I am still new to learning how to do teaching, if you guys don't mind filling out that survey that I just put in the chat, that just gives feedback on how the class went, or if you guys have any constructive criticisms. But I know I had a lot of fun teaching you guys. Knitting has been a passion for forever. It's one of my favorite things to do. You can ask anybody that has met me. If I am sitting, I am knitting, and I love teaching the craft to other people. If there is something that you would like to see me teach in the future or to be able to go over in more detail, please let me know. That is not taking responses. Cool. Thank you for letting me know. Let me fix that. Settings. Oh, there we go. Should be accepting responses now. Let me redo the link. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. So yes, thank you guys so much. I'm going to actually stop the video on that. All right. Thank you guys so much, and I guess I'll release you guys back to the main room for shenanigans. Thank you guys so much for taking part in today. I know I've been having a lot of fun. I've learned a good bit, and I've visited with a whole lot of people. So yeah, thank you guys for taking part in the Academy today. Have a good day.